People often come to me, worn to the bone by sorrow, fatigue lighting their faces like dying embers. You ask me, how do I escape this pain? And I say, you don't escape, you listen. Every wound is a word in the speech of the soul. Emotional pain isn't nuisance, it's poetry yearning to be heard. And that listening begins our liberation. The soul does not speak in facts, it dreams. It weeps and dances and slips sideways through the corridors of image. When we try to solve the soul's cries with logic, with diagnosis, with tidy boxes and systems, we do violence to its very nature. We turn the wild forest into pavement. The soul does not want to be fixed. It wants to be witnessed in its symbols. An image arrives, a boy crouched in the corner of a room holding a broken clock in his hands. He's not asking for help, he's not crying, he's simply being, and the clock ticks its last tick. What do we make of this? Not trauma or neglect, though those may have roles. Instead, we attend to the image. What is this boy telling us in his stillness? Why a clock? Why broken? Metaphor is the soul's language because it gives space for ambiguity, for the real without reduction. We lose this when we rush to interpret. He's afraid of time, someone might say. He needs to let go, but perhaps it is not about letting go. Perhaps it is about holding the moment of rupture as sacred. Perhaps that boy is teaching us how to live beside brokenness, not to mend it, but to companion it. So much of our pain comes from resisting the metaphorical mode. We want answers, but the soul wants resonance. We want to remove the thorn. The soul wants to ask why the rose drew blood in the first place. In dreams, we walk through burning houses, we speak with dead relatives, we find teeth in our palms. These are not puzzles to decode. They are not symptoms. They are invitations. If the soul offers you a serpent, it is not asking you to kill it. It's asking you to speak with it, to let its eyes look into yours. This is not easy work. It requires unlearning the reflex to fix. When someone says they feel like a ghost in their own life, don't ask them what they mean. Sit with the image of the ghost. What does it wear? Where does it haunt? Who refuses to see it? These questions do not solve, but they open. And opening is where healing begins. There's a violence in literalism. To say you are depressed is to shut the image down. To say you are carrying a black fog in your lungs that suffocates the voice is to give it soul space. Metaphor does not cure, but it cares, and that is far rarer. We forget the gods speak in symbols. They do not appear with business cards and treatment plans. They arrive in rusted cars, in recurring nightmares, in the wordless ache behind your ribs. They are not interested in being understood. They want to be honored. Let me return to the image of the broken clock. What if it's not broken at all? What if it stopped at the exact moment something sacred occurred? What if that boy was holding the memory of an event no longer visible to the eye? What if, in the silence of that final tick, time itself gave way to meaning? When we let go of the need to explain, we give the soul a chance to speak in its own tongue. This is not passivity, it's participation. Not as doctor, but as dreamer. Not as therapist, but as poet. Think of a wound not as something to heal, but as an opening through which a God speaks. If you treat it like a malfunction, you will never hear the voice. But if you sit beside it, listen, let the image swell and shimmer, you may begin to see what the soul has been trying to show you all along. The metaphor does not end. It leads. It winds. It takes you down into the underworld and then up again, not to the place you came from, but to one strange and familiar, You are different now, not cured, but imagined anew. And in this way, the soul teaches us to live not in answers, but in images, not in conclusions, but in invitations, not in the sterile light of certainty, but in the fertile dark of metaphor, where meaning breathes, elusive and alive. We chase our problems like they are thieves who've stolen peace from our lives. We stalk them in therapy, wrestle with them in sleepless nights, name them, shame them, medicate them, and pray for their disappearance. But what if the problem doesn't want to be solved? What if it wants to be seen? Not as a trespasser, but as a lover, clumsy, demanding, obsessive, but still bound to us by an invisible necessity. We do not suffer by accident. The soul is not careless in its afflictions. It chooses its troubles with precision, like a painter choosing colors, like a poet repeating a word until it bleeds meaning. A man keeps finding himself betrayed. A woman cannot leave the ache of loneliness even when surrounded by love. A child grows into adulthood and carries the same invisible wound, generation after generation. These aren't errors, they're motifs. And motifs are the soul's way of speaking in music, not measurement. There is a peculiar loyalty in suffering. It returns, not because we're cursed, but because it's unfinished. Something in us keeps circling back to that one persistent ache, not to be punished, but to be deepened, to be known. We try to exile these patterns, to outgrow them, to move on. But the soul doesn't move on. It roots in, it grows downward, and sometimes what we call dysfunction is simply the soul refusing to betray what it loves. Look at the one who can't stop longing for something they can never have. Isn't that also a kind of devotion? A love so complete it prefers yearning over possession. Or the person forever at war with themselves. What passion lives inside that internal duel? What fiery commitment to truth, to refusal, to something untamed? These aren't flaws, they're fidelities. The problem knows something we do not. It carries memory. It guards the place we've abandoned. That addiction, that failure, that recurring nightmare, these are not enemies. They are visitors. They arrive with gifts, though we often call them burdens, and they ask nothing from us but time, attention, a willingness to sit beside them without reaching for anesthesia. Of course, this is difficult. To see a problem as a form of love requires unlearning a lifetime of rejection. We've been told pain is a mistake, that happiness is the goal, but the soul doesn't care for such ambitions. It wants depth, not comfort, meaning, not relief. And sometimes it chooses the hard road because the soft one would erase us. There's a kind of sacred heartbreak at the core of every repeating problem. A person can't stop talking about their illness. Another speaks endlessly of betrayal, another about failure, and we tire of hearing it. But to them it is holy. It is the altar upon which something essential is being offered again and again. When we grow impatient, we miss the devotion. We overlook the ritual at play. To love a problem is not to give up. It is to turn toward the thing we most fear with the tenderness of a curious friend, not to ask, how do I escape you, but what have you been carrying for me all this time? The problem might weep. It might show you a child left behind, a dream you dared not pursue, a truth you buried because it threatened the structure of your life. And now it knocks not to harm you, but to bring you back to yourself. What we pathologize, the soul personalizes. What we try to dissolve, the soul tries to reveal. Problems are not interruptions in the path. They are the path not blocks to your progress, but directions toward your origin. And in that strange turn, where the wound becomes a guide, where the flaw becomes a teacher, we see that love is not always kind. Sometimes it arrives wearing the mask of despair. So the next time a problem appears, unwelcome, familiar, loud, do not chase it away. Sit with it. Ask what it remembers. Ask what it is holding in silence. You may find that beneath its rough surface lives something fragile, ancient, and inexplicably yours. You may find, too, that what you called a burden was only love, waiting to be recognized in its most unruly form. There is a rhythm to suffering, a pattern deeper than psychology's diagnoses or philosophy's abstractions. Crisis does not appear as random chaos, though it may feel that way. It is a breaking open, an invitation into descent, not for destruction, but for transformation. Something in the soul refuses to remain on the surface, so it orchestrates a collapse. The forms you've outgrown decay, the identity no longer animated by meaning begins to rot from within. You call it anxiety, depression, failure, but it is the soul beginning its work. We are not meant to ascend in straight lines. Renewal begins in the dark. There is no resurrection that doesn't first pass through a death. But the death required isn't of the body, it is the death of the literal, the fixed, the overly defined self. When the soul is hungry for expansion, it does not ask politely, it burns the ground beneath your certainties. It strips your titles, exposes your illusions, withdraws the borrowed light you once mistook for your own. And still, this is not punishment. It is imaginative necessity. The soul, unlike the ego, does not fear undoing. It sees crisis as chrysalis, but only if you let it. The modern mind, addicted to clarity and control, will try to patch the rupture, to name it a disorder, to climb back to where it fell. But the soul wants none of this. It prefers to dwell. It wants to descend into the image, into the ash, into the myth that crisis has summoned. You can feel it in the language people use. I'm falling apart. I don't know who I am anymore. Everything is slipping. These are not metaphors to fix. They are doorways. When you say, I'm lost, it may be the first honest thing you've uttered in years. The map you carried no longer fits the territory. Good. Now the imaginal can return. Imagination is not fantasy. It is the deepest truth the soul knows. When crisis wipes the canvas clean, imagination begins to paint again. Not with the tidy brushstrokes of reason, but with wild gestures, dream fragments, symbols that move sideways. Out of despair might come the scent of a forgotten garden. Out of betrayal, the sudden memory of a childhood tree. These are not escapes. They are messages. The soul does not speak in solutions. It speaks in images, patterns, rhythms. The loss of a job becomes a desert. The death of a relationship becomes a slow gray sea. These are not decorations of pain, they are the shapes of it. And if you stay with them, if you let yourself be instructed rather than repaired, something shifts, not upward, but inward. Not progress, but depth. This is the great reversal crisis. When approached imaginally, becomes renewal, not by cleaning the wound, but by entering it, by letting it become a landscape you inhabit. In myth, the hero never climbs immediately. First, there is descent into the underworld, the belly of the whale, the cave. We are not different. The collapse you resist may be the exact condition the soul requires to show you what cannot be seen in daylight. There is no timeline. Renewal has no clock. The imaginative life moves according to necessity, not urgency. You may dwell in the ruin for months, years. That is its own kind of fidelity. People will say, you're stuck. But perhaps you are faithful. Perhaps you are staying long enough for something true to take root. Out of this slow dwelling, a new form might emerge, not because you pushed for it, but because it grew from within, a changed vocation, a strange tenderness, a different relationship to time, to grief, to beauty. Renewal does not restore the old self, it births a different one shaped by image, not ambition, by inwardness, not performance. When you understand this rhythm crisis into collapse, into image, into form, you stop fearing the fall. You let yourself go, not to be shattered, but to be reimagined. The self that returns from such a descent is not stronger. That's a modern conceit. It is wiser, more porous, more in conversation with mystery. It carries the shape of its ruin like a scar that sings. And that is how the cycle moves, again and again. Crisis as call, descent as devotion, image as guide, renewal as quiet arrival, not back to who you were, but closer to who you are. What if what we call disorder is simply another mode of soul speaking? What if the voices we try silence are not symptoms, but companions? There is a subtle cruelty in our rush to label, to treat, to eradicate what does not conform to the narrow frame of normal. In doing so, we lose the language of the soul, which does not speak in facts or diagnosis, but in nuance, in image, in metaphor. It prefers inclusion to correction, depth to clarity. When someone says, "I feel broken," we rush to mend them. When someone says, "I can't go on," we offer solutions. But the soul rarely wants a fix. It wants to be seen even in its disfigurement, especially there where what we exile from our lives, our fears, our obsessions, our shame does not vanish. It gathers in the margins, waiting not to be healed, but welcome. The modern mind, in love with order, tries to make the soul behave. It turns sorrow into pathology. It treats imagination as delusion. And yet, it is precisely those unruly forces that deepen us. You cannot cut out melancholy without also cutting out reverie. You cannot sedate anxiety without muting the part of you that longs for transcendence. Inclusion does not mean agreement. It means presence. To sit beside your rage without trying to contain it. To stand in your grief without demanding it pass, to let the inner chorus sing even when its song is strange or unwelcome. Every voice in the psyche has its place. When one is banished, the others lose harmony. A man becomes obsessed with failure. He sees it everywhere, feels it in every gesture. He is told he is depressed, he is medicated, and perhaps this helps. But perhaps, too, he is carrying an ancestral wound, something left unresolved by generations. Perhaps the soul is circling this particular grief because it knows there is meaning inside it. What if we asked him to listen, not suppress? What if his pain is a ritual he doesn't yet know how to perform? To pathologize is to split off, to render one part bad or ill so that the rest can feel safe. But the psyche is not safe. It is vast, contradictory, sometimes terrifying. To be whole is not to be clean. It is to be saturated with dreams, with doubt, with shadow. We must become large enough to contain even what we cannot explain. The soul loves multiplicity. It is not interested in coherence. One part of you prays, another curses, another doubts them both. All are true. All deserve a seat at the table. When we reduce ourselves to one voice, one story, one diagnosis, we lose the richness that makes soul life worth living. Imagine a woman who hears voices. We panic, we want to intervene. But in some traditions, such a person is a vessel, a seer. The question isn't how do we stop the voices, but who is speaking? And why now? The modern world, afraid of what it cannot measure, calls this madness. The soul may call it initiation. This isn't to romanticize suffering. Pain can be unbearable. It can hollow a life. But when we respond with curiosity instead of judgment, with invitation instead of exclusion, pain becomes bearable. It becomes meaningful. It becomes the terrain through which we come to know ourselves more fully. Inclusion is an ethical act. It says, you belong. Even the parts of you you wish did not exist. Even the chaos, even the contradictions. This is not therapy, it is reverence. It is a way of living that honors the full range of human experience without trying to trim it down to something manageable. To include is to love, not sentimentally but fiercely, to say, you too are part of me. The fear, the compulsion, the wound that will not close. You are not outside. You are not a mistake. You are the soul's rough edge, the sacred distortion that keeps me real. And perhaps that is the truest form of healing, not fixing but integrating, not rising above but descend into, not solving the soul but sitting with it in all its beautiful, painful multiplicity. So when the next strange feeling comes, the next unruly image, the next echo from the unconscious, don't turn away. Turn toward it. Ask it what it wants. Ask it where it comes from, and let it stay, at least for a while. There may be something in it you've been missing all along. There is something within you that remembers why you are here. Not the conscious mind that plans or dreams or adjusts to the world, but something older, quieter, more precise. It was with you before you were given a name. It whispered behind your earliest fascinations. It tugged at you in strange moments of recognition. It knows what you were meant to do, to be, to carry. The ancients called it the Daimon, not a spirit outside you, but a presence inside, the soul's peculiar fingerprint. You do not invent this presence, you uncover it. And even then, only by listening to the signs that don't quite make sense, the longing that returns uninvited, the path that haunts even when avoided, the joy that arises for no good reason. These are not random, they are signals. The Daimon does not shout, but it does not stop either. It doesn't care if your parents approve. It is unmoved by culture, timing, economy. It has no interest in success. It's not trying to make you happy, it's trying to make you real, to make your life match the image it carries. This is not easy. It rarely aligns with what you were told life should be. Often, it seems to contradict what's convenient. But convenience is the death of the soul. When you were a child, you knew. Not in language, but in direction. There were things you loved without explanation. Stories that lit something in your chest. Places or people you felt magnetized by. That early knowing is not childish. It's closer to the source than most of adulthood will ever be. You were in touch with the Daimon then, before education, comparison, and fear began their slow erosion. Many spend years wandering because they ignored that early signal, or worse, they were shamed out of it, told to be practical, told to be someone else. The Daimon does not disappear, but when ignored, it darkens. It turns to depression, to anger, to sabotage. If it cannot create through you, it will dismantle. Not because it hates you, but because it refuses to be buried. The Daimon would rather destroy your comfort than let you live falsely. And yet, when we listen, even a little something shifts. Life gains texture, synchronicities appear, work becomes less about outcome and more about alignment. You begin to follow something rather than chase. It's a strange reversal. Instead of building a life, you are being built by something within. This is not about grand destiny. Not everyone is meant to be visible, but each soul is meant to be specific. The Daimon doesn't demand greatness, it demands fidelity to the peculiar pattern it holds. For one, it may mean solitude and silence. For another, noise and performance. For another, still, care, service, humility. The form doesn't matter. What matters is the match between inner image and outer life. And how do you cultivate this? By listening to what draws you, even if it makes no sense. By paying attention to the things that persist, obsessions, dreams, old fascinations that won't die. By honoring your envy, your jealousy, not acting on it, but seeing what it reveals about what you desire. The Daimon speaks in emotion, in ache, in repetition. You must also create space for it. Silence is its habitat. Reflection its food. It cannot thrive in a life overfilled with noise, with performance, with constant explanation. It needs gaps, room to move in the dark. You might not know what it's asking at first. You might mistake it for madness. But if you stay with it long enough, patterns will emerge. The irrational will begin to shape meaning. We live in a culture obsessed with identity and branding. But the Daimon doesn't care who you think you are. It doesn't care how others see you. It is older than reputation. It is the face behind your face. And when your outer life begins to reflect its contours, something clicks. A strange belonging arrives, not to the world, but to yourself. To cultivate the Daimon is to remember that your life was never yours alone. It was entrusted to you, a pattern, a task, a style of soul that longs to be lived, not explained, not justified, just lived. And if you live it, truly, you will not be spared pain, but your pain will make sense. It will have shape. It will have worth. You were not meant to find your purpose. You were meant to follow it, and it has been with you all along, whispering, waiting, calling you back to the life only you can live. To hope for nothing, to expect nothing, to demand nothing. This is not despair, it is the emptiness that allows soul to enter. Let your pain break you. Let it dismantle the world-worn stories you recite. In that vulnerable crack, something beautiful leaks in, the divine love hidden in the wound. So tonight, if you carry pain, listen, stay with it, dream with it, let it guide you, your deeper self. And you will discover that within the breaking you are becoming more whole. Every soul, from the moment it enters the world, carries within it a unique shape, a particularity, a fingerprint of being that cannot be replicated or dismissed. It is not something the ego chooses, nor something crafted through culture, education, or ambition. It is an image already formed, waiting to be remembered more than created. What guides it is not logic or inherited family roles, but something ancient, something akin to a silent companion that walks alongside you from the start. This presence within, the shaping force, does not speak in sentences or follow the rules of grammar. It appears in longings, in the pull toward a certain landscape, a kind of music, an inexplicable obsession. It emerges as both attraction and refusal, what we cannot help but pursue, and what we cannot abide. These are not mere preferences, they are revelations. They disclose, not explain. The modern world calls them passions, goals, maybe even fate, but those are diluted terms. What they are, truly, is necessity, dressed in the language of desire. You do not choose your deep obsessions, they arrive. They insist, and often they cause trouble. But that trouble is not disorder. It's the soul knocking at the door. Too often we think the path is linear, that destiny is a summit reached through perseverance and discipline. But that's a misunderstanding born of a heroic imagination. The soul's path is not heroic in that sense. It winds, circles, doubles back. It forgets and remembers again. Destiny does not arrive like a train at the expected station. It arrives more like a scent in the air. You suddenly notice and remember you've known all along. Love, too, is not exempt from this guiding force. Who we fall in love with, who we are drawn to despite ourselves, who we return to in dreams or daydreams, these are not accidents of emotion. They are manifestations of the same image that formed our inward shape. Often the person who feels most like home is not the one who reflects our preferences, but the one who echoes our unlived story. They carry a resonance as though the soul recognizes something it lost before it even began. This recognition is not a function of compatibility or convenience. It is not about shared interests or synchronized schedules. It is deeper than that. It is archetypal. The one who is destined appears not as a reward, but as a revelation. Their presence activates a part of us that had been dormant, not because they complete us, but because they awaken the image within us to speak more clearly. There is a psychic familiarity in their eyes, a mythic texture to their voice. Sometimes it comes with joy, and sometimes with terror, but always with depth. What draws us to this figure is not simply chemistry, though chemistry plays a part. What draws us is the undeniable feeling that something in us has met something in them that was waiting and has always been. It's why words often fail to describe this connection. The language of soul is metaphor, symbol, gesture. And when destiny is involved, what we call falling in love is actually a rising, an ascent into the interior architecture of our being, now lit from within by encounter. The world may not understand this kind of knowing. It may call it foolish or label it projection. And perhaps from the outside it appears irrational. But the soul is not governed by outer sense. It moves in the way dreams move, precise, illogical, revealing. When we try to explain destiny in the terms of planning or rationality, we reduce it. Destiny is not a product of logic. It is a myth playing out in real time. To follow this inner shaping is not always easy. It may require leaving behind expectations, roles, or even people. But to ignore it is to suffer a subtle form of exile from oneself. There is a kind of sadness that arises when we betray the image we were meant to live. And there is a kind of radiance that appears when we align with it, even briefly. That radiance may not bring happiness in the usual sense, but it brings meaning, and meaning is the soul's nourishment. So we listen, not with our ears, but with that interior sense that lives beneath words. We notice the images that return, the faces we can't forget, the paths we feared but still feel drawn toward. In those quiet, troubling, beautiful visitations, the image stirs, and in that stirring, destiny speaks. Not as command, but as invitation. There are moments in a life when something or someone appears not as a stranger, but as an inevitability, a face, a gesture, a voice that doesn't so much introduce itself as reawaken something already known. And the curious part is that it doesn't require explanation. The soul, ever ancient, recognizes what the mind cannot yet understand. We call it love, but that word is too shallow for the depth of what's occurring. It is not preference or partnership or compatibility. It is fate disguised in human form. Love, in its truest expression, is not a choice among options. It descends. It arrives unbidden. And when it does, it disrupts the well-organized systems of our lives. It does not ask permission, and it certainly doesn't negotiate. That is how fate works. not with politeness, but with inevitability. One is drawn, sometimes even unwillingly, toward a presence that has weight and meaning, even if its implications remain unclear. We may try to ignore it, dismiss it as timing or projection, but the soul is not fooled. The soul listens differently. It hears something mythic in the ordinary. The one you are meant to meet often does not align with your expectations. Fate rarely does. It is not about symmetry. It is about resonance. There is a quality to their being that echoes your own hidden life. And this is not because they complete you. That old story is too simplistic. Rather, they remind you of the image your soul has carried all along, the one it has been circling in dreams and longings, the one that only now in their presence begins to speak clearly. What makes this love different is not how it looks, but how it feels inside. There is a calm recognition, a quiet inevitability, and sometimes even a terror that something so intimate has found you. The terror isn't a sign of danger, it's a sign of depth. For the soul knows that to love like this is to surrender, not just to another, but to a part of oneself that has waited in silence. Fate is not kind or gentle, but it is precise. And love, when fated, carries that same sharpness. It carves, it cuts, it reveals. We try to contain love with stories, with labels, with rituals, but when it is truly fated, it resists enclosure. It behaves like myth, it shifts shape, defies chronology, and lives in the space between time. Some loves last a lifetime. Others arrive for a season, and yet their impact echoes forever. Duration is not the measure. Depth is. And only the soul knows how to measure in those terms. In the presence of a fated love, something ancient stirs. You remember a song you've never heard, a path you never walked, yet recognize. You do not analyze whether they are right for you. That would be like asking if the sky is the right color. You simply know. The knowing comes not from proof, but from presence. They feel inevitable. Even if their arrival makes no sense at all, that's how you know it's not strategy. It's myth playing out as intimacy. And myth never appears without demand. A fated love will ask something of you, not obedience, but transformation. It reveals where your image has grown dull, where your truth has been compromised. It calls you back to the center, not through comfort, but through confrontation. The other becomes a mirror, not of who you pretend to be, but of who you are beneath the roles. And in that reflection, you may see both your beauty and your unfinishedness. That is the gift and the terror of real love. It refuses the surface. So often we treat love as possession, as achievement, as security. But love in its deepest form is not a possession, but a pilgrimage. You are not meant to hold it. You are meant to travel with it, to be changed by it. It is not a promise of ease, but of meaning. And meaning, as the soul knows, is more valuable than certainty. If you have encountered such a love, or it has encountered you, there will be no need to convince yourself. Something in you will know, just as the earth knows the rhythm of the seasons. Even in its chaos, it will feel ordered. Even in its pain, it will feel right. And even if it breaks you open, the breaking will feel like a return. For in the end, fated love is not about happiness in the way the world defines it. It is about recognition. It is about answering a call that was whispered long before you arrived here. When that call is answered, you do not walk away unchanged. You walk away more yourself than you have ever been. There is something in you from the beginning, before schooling, before family scripts, before the world layered its expectations on your skin. Not a skill or a preference, not a talent you were praised for, but an invisible pattern. An image that was already forming, already unfolding, like a tree curled inside the silence of an acorn. You didn't choose it, it chose you. And the life you've lived since has been, whether consciously or not, a negotiation with that hidden form. The myth says we come into the world with a seed of our destiny already shaped, not as fate in the sense of rigidity or punishment, but as a unique calling, a code. And this code is not written in language or even logic. It expresses itself in glimpses in the strange passions of childhood, the symbols in our dreams, the kinds of beauty we recognize without knowing why. These are not random. They are the early murmurings of the acorn inside. But modern life rarely makes room for such mysteries. Instead, it tells us we must construct ourselves. We must achieve identity through effort and will, as if the soul were a blank page rather than a hidden script. The danger is not in striving, it is in forgetting that the soul already knows the direction of its longing. The real task is not invention, but remembrance, not construction, but cultivation. Children often give us the first glimpse of this acorn myth. A child who is obsessed with birds or maps or drawing faces over and over again, this is not just play. It is image speaking, not image in the superficial sense, but in the ancient way, image as that which reveals soul. And yet, we ask children what they want to be as though the answer should be invented on the spot. The better question would be, what is already becoming in you? And then, as time passes, we learn to dismiss these early leanings. We trade them for approval, for efficiency, for belonging. We step away from the peculiarities of soul and toward the generalities of culture. But the acorn does not vanish. It withdraws, it waits, sometimes for decades, and it waits not with frustration, but with patience. Because it knows that one day, in some quiet moment, perhaps after a failure or a heartbreak or a sudden glimpse of beauty, we will feel again the pull of what we were meant to become. This becoming is not smooth. It is not linear. The acorn myth is not a motivational slogan. It does not promise success or happiness in the conventional sense. It promises only that there is something in you that belongs to you and no one else. Something not earned, but given. And to live in accordance with that is not to be rewarded. It is to be real. Sometimes the acorn takes the shape of suffering. A wound, a repeated pattern, a shadow that won't leave us alone. That too can be image. The soul doesn't separate the beautiful from the broken. It uses both. What hurts may also point. What confuses may also carry direction. This is not sentimentality. It is depth. The image of the soul contains light and shadow, ascent and descent. To awaken to the myth of the acorn is not to become someone new. It is to stop pretending to someone else. It is to allow what is already seeded in you to take root and grow in its own crooked, sacred way. And this growth may not make sense from the outside. Others may call it irrational, unwise, even selfish. But the acorn does not grow toward consensus. It grows toward essence. And so when you find yourself pulled toward something, an art, a place, a person, even a kind of solitude, pay attention. Ask not whether it's practical, but whether it stirs that quiet recognition in your chest. The one that feels like returning home to a place you've never been. That is the acorn speaking. That is the image remembering itself. This myth is not a map. It is more like a haunting, a presence that walks with you and reminds you in dreams or in despair, in longing or in love, that you are here for something singular. You don't have to find it. It is already inside you. All that's needed is to listen, not with your ears, but with the inner sense that knows the tree is already folded inside the seed. Imagination is not the opposite of reality. It is the ground out of which reality is shaped. Before things become fixed, they are seen. Before the world is acted upon, it is envisioned. What you call the real world is already laced with image, layered with symbols, cloaked in stories that were quietly placed there by the soul. We do not live in an objective universe, we live in a field of meaning, and meaning comes to us through images, not the kind in advertising or cinema, but the deeper images that rise from within, archetypal, mythic, haunting in their precision. Image is not decoration. It is not something added later to make life more beautiful. It is the foundation, the very language of soul. The soul speaks in pictures, in metaphors, in subtle shapes that suggest rather than declare. It does not give explanations. It offers images, and it waits for you to listen with a part of yourself that lies beneath analysis. When you ignore these images, you begin to flatten. You become literal. Life becomes only facts, only schedules, only function. And in that forgetting, something essential is lost. But the imagination doesn't disappear when neglected, it descends. It sinks below consciousness and begins to express itself in symptoms, in neurosis, in dreams that won't leave you alone. A depression may be the imagination demanding attention, a recurring fear, a compulsion. These may not be problems to be solved, but images to be interpreted. They are not always asking for elimination, but for reverence. Not everything that disturbs you is trying to harm you. Some things disturb because they are trying to wake the soul. We have inherited a habit of suspicion toward imagination. We're told to be realistic, to ground ourselves in hard data, to distrust what cannot be measured, and yet every time we fall in love, every time we grieve, every time we remember a moment of childhood that shaped us, we are inside image. Even memory is not factual. It is shaped by the emotional tone of image. And the future, we do not walk into it with numbers, we walk into it with visions, with hopes and anxieties that all speak in image. So if you want to live fully, do not dismiss imagination as childish. Recognize it as the way your soul navigates reality. Ask not just what is happening, but what image is being activated in this moment. A man loses his job, and he feels like a fallen king. That is not melodrama, it is myth. A woman meets a stranger and feels like she's known him for lifetimes. That is not fantasy, it is archetypal recognition. These are not errors of perception. They are the deeper truths hiding behind appearances. To live imaginatively is not to escape life. It is to enter life more fully. It is to see with the heart's eye. It is to notice that the tree outside your window doesn't just exist. It leans, it listens, it reminds you of something you've forgotten. The child who draws a monster may not be making things up. He may be offering you an image of a fear that can only be expressed that way. To dismiss it is to silence the soul. To take it seriously is to begin a conversation with something greater than yourself. Imagination links us to that which is more than personal. The images that move us, an eagle in flight, a broken clock, a weeping statue, are not just personal fascinations. They belong to the collective psyche. They are echoes of a memory older than you, and they call you into a wider field of meaning. To see symbolically is not to reject the world, it is to recognize the world as layered, textured, alive with soul. We are not here to strip the world of its meanings. We are here to see more deeply into what is already there, not to control it, but to be in dialogue with it, not to own it, but to be reshaped by it. Imagination allows that dialogue to take place. It turns ordinary events into messages turns strangers into guides, turns grief into initiation. When you live this way, the world becomes not a task to endure, but a story to be in relationship with. And in that story, the images that find you through dreams, through art, through quiet intuition are not passing thoughts. They are seeds. They are clues. They are the soul's way of showing you what it needs, what it loves, and where it longs to go. The question is never whether the image is real. The question is whether you are willing to follow where it leads. There are moments in life that do not require explanation. They do not arrive with proof or follow reasoned steps. They simply are, and in their presence, something deep within responds, not with understanding, but with recognition. This knowing is not a product of logic or the result of decision. It is immediate, embodied, ancient. You feel it before you can name it, and even when you try to doubt it, it remains. It lives beneath doubt. It is not loud, but it is immovable. This kind of knowing comes from the soul, not the ego. It doesn't argue its case. It doesn't need to. When you encounter something or someone that matches your inner image, the diamond stirring within, it clicks into place with the same quiet certainty that a key has when it finds its lock. There's no struggle, no persuasion. It just fits, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. We are trained to second-guess ourselves, to require evidence for what we feel. But the soul doesn't speak in evidence. It speaks in moods, in symbols, in the resonance of an experience. When you meet someone and something in you settles, or opens, or remembers, pay attention. That sensation is not confusion. It is clarity dressed in mystery. The truth of the soul is not about being convinced. It is about being claimed. Unmistakable knowing feels like being found by something that already knew you. It may not arrive with fanfare. Often it shows up in silence, in a glance held slightly too long, in the way time seems to bend when the other enters the room. You cannot prove why it matters. You only know that it does. We often mistake familiarity for destiny, but true knowing is not about comfort. It is about depth. Sometimes it arrives as unease because the soul recognizes that a part of itself is being stirred awake. That awakening may be joyful, but it can also be disorienting. The soul does not always smile when it remembers. It can also weep. But whether it comes with tears or calm, the knowing is unmistakable. This kind of recognition doesn't depend on words. In fact, too many words can dilute it. What the soul knows, it knows in silence. And when someone touches that inner place in you, they don't explain themselves into your heart. They appear there, fully formed, as if they had always been living quietly at the edge of your imagination. You see them in something ancient sighs, ah, yes. And this doesn't mean the path will be easy. The soul does not promise ease, it promises meaning. The person you recognize in this way may challenge you, stretch you, even disturb you, but that is not a sign to turn away. That is a sign you are brushing against something archetypal, something real. The soul does not always deliver sweetness, it delivers truth, and truth reshapes. We are so conditioned to ignore this kind of inner clarity. We ask others what they think. We consult our fears. We delay. But when the knowing arrives, it is already whole. It doesn't require committee. It doesn't need to be voted on. And even if you try to run from it, you will carry it with you. The soul does not forget its own recognitions. There is no formula for this. There is no map. This kind of knowing cannot be taught. It can only be honored. You can prepare yourself by quieting the noise, by tending your imagination, by following the threads of what calls to you. But when the moment comes, when the person appears, when the feeling floods in, you will know. Not because it makes sense, but because something in you stops searching. This knowing does not promise forever. The soul is not interested in permanence. It is interested in depth. Moment of deep recognition can change a life more than a decade of routine, and the person who awakens that knowing in you may not stay, but their imprint will, because they did not arrive to decorate your life. They arrive to remind you of something essential, something only your soul could understand. So trust what moves you beyond reason. Trust the presence that pulls you closer without demand. Trust the silence that speaks louder than all your questions. That is the soul remembering itself. And when you feel that remembering, you don't need to ask, is this real? You already know